This is a lecture for Bio 101 on the basics of cancer and some treatment options available currently. And so the information in this lecture is not necessarily something that you're going to be tested on. There are certain learning objectives related to how cancers form, how that's related to the cell cycle, as well as different risk factors for cancer and why they're risk factors. And so that's some stuff you'll need to pay attention to. The treatment stuff is more of an FYI, as I'm sure that you've heard some of these terms, and I'd like you to be familiar at least with some of the available cancer treatments just for your own personal edification, right? And so sometimes, especially in the current kind of state of things with the pandemic, we tend to forget that cancer is still the second leading cause of death in the United States. So 1 in 4 deaths in the United States result from cancer, and in 2015, 1.6 million people were diagnosed in the United States alone, and of those 1.6 million, about 600,000 people died. And so in class, during lecture, we took a poll, and I believe it was something like 96% of you knew somebody who had cancer, and 75-ish%, I think, knew somebody who had unfortunately died from cancer. And so this is still a huge problem. And as the population continues to age in the United States, it will continue to be a leading cause of death. Because one of the major risk factors for cancer is aging, and we'll talk a little bit about why that is later on. And so we're going to start first by defining cancer. And really, cancer is sort of a generic term for any disease that's caused by the uncontrolled division of abnormal cells. And so normally, cells will require growth factors in order to divide. And when those growth factors aren't present, those cells won't enter into the cell cycle, and they won't divide. However, cancer cells will divide regardless of whether or not there are growth factors present. And so that uncontrolled division can lead to disease. And some terms associated with cancer, at least from a disease perspective, are tumor. And what's important to remember about tumor is that it is an abnormal mass of cells, but that not all tumors have to be cancerous. Some tumors are what are called benign, where they're not cancerous and they're not able to spread to other tissues. And other tumors are what are known as malignant or cancerous, and those malignant tumors are the ones that can spread from one tissue to another. And the process by which malignant cancer cells spread is called metastasis. And so metastasis is this process of cancer cells moving around within the body and being able to invade other tissues, or from a cancerous tissue or cancer cells in your lung to be able to move around and invade and cause cancer in your brain. Right? And so tumors are just an abnormal mass of cells. Some of them are benign or non-cancerous, and the ones that are cancerous are known as malignant because they can metastasize or move around the body. And so how does this happen? How does a normal dividing cell become a cancer cell? The real answer is through regulation or dysregulation of the cell cycle. And so in the previous couple lectures, we discussed the cell cycle at length, and the stages of interphase, the stages of mitosis. We also talked about how important it is that each step of the cell cycle is checked and double-checked in order to keep the cell cycle regulated, to make sure that abnormal cells are not dividing, to make sure that cells with DNA damage are not dividing, to make sure that cells that don't have enough DNA because replication has failed are not dividing. And there are certain genes or proteins that are needed to regulate the cell cycle. And they work at these specific checkpoints that we discussed in the previous lectures. And what happens in cancer is that important genes involved in maintaining these checkpoints throughout the cell cycle accumulate mutations or changes in their DNA. And those genes or proteins become non-functional, which can lead to the basically destruction of the checkpoints within the cell cycle, and the cell can divide uncontrollably, leading to cancer. And so some of the genes that become mutated and ultimately promote cancer through dysregulation of the cell cycle are oncogenes and tumor suppressor genes. So oncogenes code for proteins that increase or upregulate cell division. They promote cell division. And they can accumulate mutations that just make them too good at this job. The proteins become too good at promoting cell division, and that uncontrolled dividing leads to cancer. So oncogenes generally are mutated in a way that upregulates their function or makes them too good at promoting cell division, leading to cancer. Tumor suppressor genes do exactly what the name suggests. They suppress formation of tumors when they're functioning normally. And they code for proteins that stop the cell cycle or that can promote apoptosis, or cell death. And both of these things, stopping the cell cycle or killing the cell, will suppress formation of a mass of a tumor, right? And so a mutation in tumor suppressor genes generally makes them inactive so that they are no longer stopping the cell cycle or no longer promoting cell death, which leads to uncontrolled division of abnormal cells or cancer. And one gene that you may have heard of in relation to cancer, that's a tumor suppressor gene that's mutated in half of all human cancers, is the p53 gene. And p53 is a tumor suppressor whose function is to stop the cell cycle. And mutations in p53 make this protein inactive. And when p53 can no longer stop the cell cycle, cancer results from that. And some of the risk factors associated with cancer or that can increase your cancer risk are seen here. Age is at the top of the list. And so the increase of developing most types of cancer increases with age. Additionally, there are some genetic risk factors, in particularly associated with breast cancer, that may increase your risk. Diet and obesity can increase your risk of cancer. There's a link between type 2 diabetes and increased cancer risk. Additionally, there are some ways in which hormones, including anabolic steroids and birth control pills, can increase the risk of cancer. And that's because hormones are basically growth factors, and those growth factors promote cell division. And they can also promote cell division of abnormal cells, right? Increasing the risk of cancer. Additionally, exposure to cancer-causing agents called carcinogens, such as tobacco, UV light from the sun, heavy metals, asbestos, arsenic, can all increase your risk of cancer. And what's important to note about all of these diverse risk factors for cancer is that they cause damage to the DNA and lead to mutations. And these mutations and DNA damage are ultimately what promote cancer, right? And so as we age, we tend to accumulate mutations. And the more mutations we have, or the older we are, the more mutations we accumulate. And those mutations can increase our risk of cancer. In terms of carcinogens, UV light can induce damage of DNA, as can heavy metals like lead and chromium and asbestos. And that damage to DNA can ultimately lead to cancer. And so while these factors kind of seem unrelated, they actually all share this hallmark of leading to DNA damage and mutations, and therefore leading to cancer.